Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you all. My name is Professor Ronnie Brown, and I'm I'm still saying the newly appointed, because I reckon it buys me time. So I'm still going with the newly appointed Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Head of the London College of Fashion, about 8 weeks into my post. So a very warm welcome to you all from the rather fabulous London College of Fashion. As I say, this is my first of what I know will be many welcomes to professorial lectures and to our public programme and to an audience such as this. So with us are colleagues from LCF and UAL, colleagues from other universities, industry, and our partners from Stratford East Bank, V&A East. And I must also welcome Kate's family, who are in the audience. So you're all massively welcome. So I think it's fair to say that universities have sometimes been accused of talking rather too much to themselves and for employing an exclusive and perhaps esoteric language. And it's one of the many remarkable features of LCF that its research activities are so connected to the real world and to the most urgent systemic challenges that we face, and that it connects with, at the very design stage, audiences well beyond the academy. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that and the work of the Centre for Sustainable Fashion in a minute from Professor Dilys Williams. And then we'll move on to Professor Kate Fletcher's introduction and her lecture, and what I'm sure will be an evening of brilliant networking and debate, supported a little bit later by classic LCF-style hospitality, to which you're all very welcome. So please enjoy your evening, and I think it's down to me to say that we're not expecting a fire drill this evening. So if you hear one, please evacuate via the green signs that we all know how to recognise. Exit the building via the stairs, and once you're outside, please disperse. Yeah, that's what we do here. So, anyway, can I welcome next, please, Professor Dilys Williams, who's Director of the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. Good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see everybody here this evening. I'm sure you're very excited as I am to be welcoming Professor Kate Fletcher for her Professorial Platform. And as I'm sure you all know, or if you don't know already, you soon will, Kate is an amazing scholar, a poet, a friend, and also a great contributor to all of the work that we do. And as far as her contribution to the study of fashion in nature is concerned, the communities within this college, across the university, many other universities, as Ronnie said, and out into the world, it resonates really deeply and widely. And for us, for Centre for Sustainable Fashion, tonight is a really important marker of how we want to develop education, social practice, design practice, business practice, with earth and equity first in mind. So it's a great marker for us in that exploration. And Kate first joined the centre back in 2008, when Nina and I were sitting in a little kind of cupboard, actually, behind the gallery almost. And we plotted ways in which we could find a way to be able to get her to join our team. So Kate's work and her membership of the centre has vitally informed our work ever since. And we are now a vibrant community of designers, tutors, researchers, practitioners from a range of different backgrounds and experiences. So we take a very pluralistic approach to our deepening understanding of our interdependencies with each other in nature. We do this through designing, through making, but also through research, through collaborative practice, which in this college is called knowledge exchange, and through teaching and learning, working with courses and tutors across every single discipline, every single level, every single course throughout this college. And that to us is incredibly important because we know that it is the whole of the fashion system that needs to invert its gaze from an economy first to ecology first source of wealth and health. And for us, taking an example of the words of David Suzuki, the economy is a human construct. We invented it. We can change the rules of the economy. We can't change the rules of ecology. Those are nature's laws. And for us at CSF, those are the laws that we seek to abide by. It's not easy. It's certainly not something that we do lightly. And we don't always agree on how it's best to contribute to, which is what is actually, in effect, a new era of consciousness. But what we do is, and what is part of our distinction, is that we really share with each other, we learn from each other, and we look at the different ways and the different locations and places in which we apply our work and learn from our work. And we recognise the tensions inherent in working in these different scales, locations, and with people who have very different things at stake. Different kinds of power, different kinds of vulnerabilities. And we have seen that through our work, huge shifts are taking place in how students are thinking and how our graduates are perceived in the world, taking place across the way that fashion is taught, practiced, and understood by ourselves, by those who work with us, through from kind of sole designers that are just graduating, through to teams within really big organisations. And that for us is incredibly exciting. It's terrifying at times as well. But the scope of what it means to be a fashion designer really is changing. And I think it's really up to us to be able to sit with those words and to be able to reconceptualise them. And through that, we're also seeing that we're starting to be able to work with all sorts of people in all sorts of places that we could not have imagined when we first set out. So for us, we have a set of guiding principles to steer us. And we do speak out about the things that we know to be destructive, and we support the things that we know to be restorative. But whilst we're really proud of the things that we've done and are doing, we're also acutely aware of the impending ecological crisis and the rising social inequality that rings almost deafeningly in our ears. And this is something that we all cope with on a daily basis. So there's never been a more important time for us to embrace the tension between these different perspectives, to be able to learn with those who are living the climate emergency on a daily basis, as you will find out through seeing some of our projects, through to working with people who feel that they really can't move beyond the infrastructures and the short-term dependencies that they feel bound by. So this is our challenge and this is our opportunity. And whilst there is a lot around us that is very disheartening in terms of the sort of inaction that's taking place, we do see through our work and through the people in this room, through the people we work with, there is so much to be hopeful about because people are taking action quietly and loudly, taking care of life in all of its different kinds of forms. And we're emboldened by this and by each other and by everybody with whom we live and work. But we also know that our actions are dependent on what is socially, politically acceptable, the things that we hold dear to us on a basis that we can share with each other. And our clothes, obviously, are the things that we hold closest to our skins. So maybe for us, we see that fashion and sustainability is more important now than ever. And to be able to talk about it in terms that are really deeply personal is incredibly important. So we're at a really decisive moment in how we can really look at fashion's cultural forms and how they can be developed to express who we are under new terms. So that, for us, is really fundamental to our work. And it's up to all of us. And there's great evidence of what each of us is capable of. We see it here through the role of education. Working at London College of Fashion, it means that we are able to vitally change how we think about ourselves, to change ourselves as we seek to change that fashion system from the inside out and from the outside in. So that for us is our starting point, and for you this evening, hopefully an introduction to why it was that we were back in 2008 so keen for Kate to come and become a part of the centre. So I'd just like to thank Kate for all that she brings to CSF, for the long-standing, outstanding, incredible understanding that we have through her work. She inspires us, she inspires our students, and all who come to touch our work in many different ways. So thank you, Kate, for helping us to design with nature in mind. So I'll pass you over to Matilda.
Thank you, Dilys. Hello, I'm Matilda Tam. I'm professor at InDesign at Linnaeus University, and I also work at Goldsmiths, University of London. And it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Kate Fletcher. Her visionary, lucid and tenacious work in fashion and sustainability has shaped the discourses and practices in this field, and indeed highly contributed to there being such an assertive field in the first place. Kate Fletcher brought systems thinking to fashion, and this and the very pioneering key concepts and work she has developed, such as slow fashion, local fashion, craft of use, fashion ecologies, have forever changed how we understand and do fashion, textiles, and sustainability. Through her many publications, talks, consultancy, and teaching, Kate has reached and inspired many, many people worldwide, and she is the most cited scholar in this field. I have known Kate for a long time. In 2002, I was lucky enough to be her first PhD student, probably also the slowest maturing and longest with her. And we have since collaborated on the Lifetime Project and a series of publications, the Routledge Handbook of Fashion and Sustainability, Design and Nature, a partnership with Louise St. Pierre, and most recently, Earth Logic, a fashion action research plan. And kick-started in not this room, but a room close to us a year and a half ago. Kate Fletcher, Linda Grouse, Timo Rissanen, and I founded the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion, which now has 500 members, over 500 members worldwide in 55 countries. Through this work, I have had the great fortune to get to know Kate as a colleague, as a friend, and also as a co-traveler on a journey of change. And what has struck me is Kate's foresight, commitment, and courage. Today, in 2020, working in the remit of sustainability, I wouldn't say it's exactly uncontentious, but it is a far cry from what it was like when Kate set out in this field, this non-existent field, in the 1990s. We are many who are also inspired by Kate's commitment to systemic and holistic perspectives. In any meeting, however tricky, she will always refuse a simplification of sustainability. And in this, she also shows her confidence in people's ability to, in Donna Haraway's terms, stay with the trouble of complexity. Kate's work is always challenging us to understand fashion as part of nature, to grapple with limits to growth, challenging students and colleagues to stretch their ideas to their full potential. However, Kate places the hardest challenges on herself, always challenging her own ideas, the contributions she makes, the conclusions she makes, the words she uses. Therefore, being in her midst, directly or through her words, is being in the midst of curiosity, learning, inspiration, and world-making in motion. Now, let's step into this and let's welcome Professor Kate Fletcher.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Dilys, and thank you, Matilda, and thank you all for coming so much. Matilda said before, it's we're all. What did you say? We're not in the boat. We're in a sauna. Let's be all in this boat together, and that's what it feels like. Let me just sort this out. Full screen. So, yeah, what a pleasure to be here. And I am, of course, deeply blushing inside. I would say that throughout my life, the whole of my life, as a child and up to today, I think I approach every activity and every relationship with a huge amount of hope. And I think I try to bring that with me, and I'm not really sure how I've sustained that or even where it's come from, but I think that this is the thing that is one of the threads that keeps me going. It is very frequently asked of me why I do what I do, where did it begin, where are its origins, and I would probably say the point for me where things really began was in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, which perhaps for the first time brought popular attention to quite an integrated conversation about change, about sustainability, about people's lives. And at that moment, I started working with textiles and with fashion and with sustainability in a different way. But actually, its practical roots, the practical roots of the beginning of what I'm doing are much deeper. I was born and grew up in Liverpool, as you can probably tell from my accent. It's a city, as you probably know, in the north of England. And our family was a working class family. The only family member is my brother, Scott, who's here. So he and I and our other siblings grew up in this family. And in the 1980s, Liverpool was a really bleak place. There were few jobs and even fewer opportunities and fewer expectations of what you might be. Margaret Thatcher famously condemned the city of Liverpool to a state of managed decline, partly in response to its militancy and all the dock workers' strikes and all the other things. And only later, when I left Liverpool, did I discover that it wasn't the same everywhere else. That, you know, in Reading or Newbury, that this wasn't like this. And I was really shocked. I was like, oh, really? But you know, in that time, perhaps that was when I realized that things had to change. Perhaps where the seeds of hope were sown was back then. So what was Liverpool like in the 1980s? Well, it was like all of these things, all mixed up in confusing ways. It was definitely a struggle. There was quite a lot of community, but I'm not putting the gloss on this. It was also extraordinarily bleak. It's already a city at the margins because of its geography, but it has such a strong anti-establishment thread running through it, and that's really, really present in me. I just can't shake it. It's very bold, it's very risky, extremely political, and of course Liverpool were doing well, as they are today. I feel like should I show you? Yes. So that was the hope, that was the Rio Earth Summit, that was what Liverpool was like. And this is what my life is like today. It's pretty much the same. I think perhaps it prepared me well. You know, I'm not a well-connected person. Our parents have no social capital whatsoever. They did have, of course, lots of practical skills. They knew how to make things and repair things. They cared for their neighbours, for our neighbours, and they did a lot of things in the community. And I remember being told by my grandparents when I was growing up, when I talked about plans that I had to go to university, they told me that I shouldn't get ideas above my station, that I should know my place, that I shouldn't follow Scott. It's all your fault. Shouldn't follow Scott to university. That shop work, working a till in a shop, was good work for girls. And in some ways, they were right, because actually, literally, knowing your place is where it all begins. Know it, cherish it, care for it. Fashion has really lost sight of the earth and of the neighbours that we share this earth with, including the human neighbours. And this is our place now. This context of a planet on the edge is the context for every fashion activity. It shapes what we do. It shapes all of our choices. WWF, of course, told us quite a few years ago now that the delicate balance on planet Earth is being shifted and all living species are in decline. In the course of my life, that's a reduction in animal species by 58%. And we all know, you don't need me to tell you this, that fashion absolutely contributes to these impacts. The creeping global mega crisis that we're facing is in part based on some of the choices that people are making. So, to mitigate this impact, many people, including those in this room and others, have been working to try to address this. So in the 1990s, I started a PhD at Chelsea College of Art and Design. I don't know if anybody from Chelsea is here, a couple. And I was the first person to go through in the design school with a PhD there. And my work was looking at design for sustainability strategies and particularly looking at how to apply them to a fashion and textiles context. I also grew 1.5 acres of hemp in Kent as part of a local textiles project with Bioregional, a charity, and we ended up making a jacket and trying to see, is it possible within the bioregion of the south of England or the southeast of England, to begin to understand what local textiles means? After that, I moved to Goldsmiths in London, where I worked for 2 years on curriculum development, online curriculum development and design for sustainability. I also taught on the first BA in eco-design that existed anywhere else in the world. These were extraordinarily exciting times, places where the knowledge in this field was both being shaped and being opened up and offered around. And then, while I was doing that, I was experimenting with lots of other people, linking arms with them in many ways. There was a project that I did with Becky Early for a couple of years that applied some of the findings from my PhD. And then, as Matilda said, she and I worked exploring different lifetimes and rhythms of use in clothing, work that went on to be the foundational idea for understanding what slow culture might mean for fashion. In some ways, I suppose, I feel like I've always been a bit like a scout or a runner, somebody that you send off in an advanced party to see what the conditions are like, who's involved, to take risks, to act at the threshold of things. But actually, the more that I explored these projects, the more that you get down to the detail of what's involved and really try to ask specific questions, the more it becomes clear that you sort of have to do the opposite in order to appreciate the detail of these things. Instead, you need to move upwards towards the whole. You need to look for the interdependencies and relations between things. What we need is to set a course where we examine the fundamental systemic questions and we engage with underlying structures and emerging bodies of new knowledge. And this is the essential learning. When you look down at the level of detail, you need to begin to look in the opposite direction. Why? Because if you don't, you're faced with the problem that we're in at the moment. Despite all our best efforts, the net impact of the system that we're working in is increasing. And as we build systems understanding, it seems that perhaps we see, maybe with greater clarity than ever before, that there has to be a really fundamental, a radical change in the way that we do things. Because all of the current approaches that we're dealing with, many of the efficiency drives, many of the things that we see as an essential cornerstone of what we're seeing as part of fashion and sustainability practice are simply too similar to each other. They're too neat, they're too simple, they're too human scale, they're not human scale. They don't take account of other species. They just simply don't recognize the interconnected forces that influence the whole system. In 2009, as I'm sure you know, a piece of research, an extraordinarily comprehensive piece of research, was published by the Stockholm Resilience Centre that identified 9 planetary boundaries, and it said that if these were transgressed, it would lead to unpredictable instability in Earth's systems. 3 of these, of course, have already been transgressed. Everybody knows them, of course: climate change, rate of intervention in nitrogen cycles, and loss of biodiversity. So you know that, and then you also know that the system that we're working in is optimized not for planet, but for growth. And all of the efficiency gains that we've been dabbling with, they just don't mean much when you have a system that's based in aggregate growth. I think the challenge of fashion is actually to join the world, to get closer to the reality of life on this planet as it is now, to overthrow the fiction that somehow, somewhere we can escape the planet and its limits. But what does it mean? What does it mean to join the world? What does it mean to know your place? The American poet Gary Snyder gives advice for people who are sort of a bit stuck, because fundamental and difficult challenges like this happen all the time. And his advice is 2 parts. And the first of it, he says, what you need to do, first of all, is to build deep knowledge of where you are right now. And then the second thing, once you've got that knowledge, is you need to stray. You need to take a risk and go into new territory and explore new ground. So, the grounding, super quickly. We all, of course, know that fashion is an engine of consumerism, that the consumer society is so dominant in the clothes that we buy, in the clothes that we wear, that we hardly even notice it. Indeed, buying new clothes and getting rid of existing ones has become the established component of modern living. We tell ourselves a story that progress is synonymous with economic growth, with buying more, with shopping, including for clothes. And of course, a key theme running through this is more and cheaper. In the first decade of the 21st century, clothing prices in Europe fell by 1/4, and in that same period, guess what? We bought 1/5 more clothes. How long products last is influenced by the market's need to grow sales and show positive returns on the bottom line. And this goes on to dictate the nature of dressing. It dictates what we wear. And it also draws businesses into the market, leading businesses to provide these things that it thinks we want. And this includes sustainability solutions. We're in a system that's based on both more and growth. And actually what we're dealing with here is not, I would say, predominantly a technical challenge. This is a challenge about politics. This is about everyday decisions and how we live. We already have many of the technologies we need to transform our society. We just don't have the skills. Okay, so you ground yourself and then off you go and you stray. So I've been doing this in many and very varied ways for a very long time. One of the big projects I did, The Craft of Use, involved me gathering almost 500 different stories and portrait photographs from members of the public on 3 different continents about a wide range of fashion activity that's not confined by the idea that fashion is shopping. I was interested in the very widespread but little appreciated skills, the ideas, the behaviours associated with using clothes, with maintaining them, with wearing them over time. I was interested in these things because using things is not dependent on producing and consuming more. Because use is a possible route to less. So the process of gathering stories was pretty simple. We set up a community photo shoot. We hired a space, often in a community hall. We advertised it on local radio, on social media, and signs in newsagents' windows and in bus stops and things. And then we waited. This was a guy that came to a photo shoot in the town or the village that I live in the north of England. He was in his 80s and he brought along what he described as his 3-stage jacket. It was a narrow, tight-fitting waistcoat, and he said he wore it for a few years. It was given to him. He wore it for a few years, and then he said he put some weight on at the front and he couldn't fasten it. So he took a pair of scissors and he slit it up the back, and then he knitted this panel and inserted it in the back. Then a few years later, he said he decided that what it needed was some sleeves. So he added sleeves, a collar, and a waistband. And then, when more weight was added, he then added 3 latchets, his words. I didn't even know what that was. It's like a piece of leatherette fabric across the front. And he finished each one with a sequin. The knowledge and the skills to open up a garment and adjust it to fit, they contribute to a very rich and confident society. They remind us about ingenuity and what you can do. They help replace consumption with action. Evidence actually also suggests that they really affect the pleasure that we get from our garments. Yet it's really very difficult to talk to people about use. It's very hidden from view. It's not noticed or celebrated. Certainly, of course, not by the fashion industry, which lavishes attention upon what happens up to the point of purchase, but rarely beyond it. And yet, using things fully and with pleasure can satisfy many of the same needs that we try to meet when we buy new goods. To use and use again offers a vision for fashion not only tied to consumerism. This dress, modelled by Jean, was brought to a photo shoot in London. And also to the photo shoot were her 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters who all actively wear the same dress. Sharing clothes can save resources if it means fewer pieces are bought. It can meet a need that we all have for novelty, but without an expanding, changing wardrobe. Perhaps what we really need is that, to understand, is that things need tending and using no less than creating, and paying attention to how we do that isn't some sort of like marginal or alternative thing to do. It's about how we might live in these very uncertain times with lightness, with optimism, and with principle. What we're talking about here is a shift from growth logic to, in crafted user's case, to use logic. Usership as distinct to ownership is a view of fashion beyond the market alone. It trades, of course, in the economies of time, creativity, community, imagination, and not just more consumption. I suppose what it is, it's fashion in a space where you choose to want what you've already got. So what this does is it gives us an opportunity to combine data in new ways, to combine knowledge of society and use together with the knowledge of industry. It's about where public good and private interest possibly can come together. It recognises the conditions that are there, and it starts with them. Perhaps what this is more than anything else is it shows a view of fashion which is not an industrial sponsored view of it at all. It enlarges it. It shows us, as people working in this sector, where we can act. And it also tells us that sustainability can't be defined in functional terms alone. It's a movement, isn't it? Concerned with others. And this is a different business than the one that we're used to. So all of this work, which is trying to work in a different way, to look at what might be, does a very magical thing for me, which is it takes us away from this place of abstract ideas that aren't rooted in the health of the soil and in communities and what it means to be a good citizen. It takes it away from that, and it takes it towards direct experience. It's about using our imagination to join the world, not to escape it, to engage more fully with planetary limits, to engage more fully with the climate emergency. The point here is that we have to get closer to reality. We have to engage with embodied ways of knowing that make us present, alive in the places that we live, and so that we act in response to everything else that lives there. After the Craft of Use, I did a project about localism. And the starting point for this is a very simple idea, and it's one that I am fully persuaded by, that the site or the place where something happens is a criterion for sustainability change, because place really does matter. Local ecosystems provide both resources and constraints to an area's activity. People and communities evolve with unique natural and social assets, depending on where they're based. Place gives unique form to a fashion system, and with it, the promise of really important and long-lasting change. How do you start? Well, I would suggest that you start by trying to ecologize the fashion system. Ecology, of course, is the study of relationships between things and their surroundings. And because ecosystems vary depending where you are, for locally varied ecosystems to flourish and for their wealth to be conserved. The activities within them, whether they're knowledge, whether it's communities, whether it's product, whether it's cultures, whether it's practices, they require adaptation to a specific place. This can't happen within globalization. This is a radical reimagining of how this will take place. And the Fashion Ecologies project took as its starting point the biggest town near where I live, the centre, literally, on this map of the UK. But it's not the centre of pretty much anything, I would say. Has anyone even been to Macclesfield? Oh, everybody! How exciting. But for this project, what we did is we literally mapped, drew, interviewed, audited, loitered on the streets, tried to look at methods inspired by art practices, looked at ethnology, soft systems, methodologies, and ecology research, among others. And what we were trying to do was to gather data from both the formal and the informal economy, from both private and public spaces, data that conform to conventional understanding about what constitutes valuable clothing activity, and also that which didn't. And what we did was to try to build a really strong resource map and understand what was there. And part of that was a sudden opening up, a broadening of our appreciation of what was important. We ended up making a book of methods, 50 different methods. I know there's loads of people in this room who contributed one of the methods to this book, which help us open up this space of a wardrobe to engage with what goes on with clothes beyond the point of purchase. And with that opening up, we give it more space and more credence and more legitimacy. So in Macclesfield, what we ended up doing was building a really interesting sort of understanding of fashion as an integrated whole. This is a fusion of materials, of processes, of people, of place. We modelled it as a root system and then the top growth above ground. And for that work, perhaps you could have a look at some of the papers, various papers that was published. But one of the things perhaps is important to note is much of this work which is grounded in reality isn't really very pretty. It's the unpopular bits, the ugly bits that also are important to keep on. And what we see is that fashion's culture is absolutely a reflection of place. Perhaps it's time we thought about the places in which we live. So all of this work is all about trying to hold any of the projects that you're doing in context, maintain them within the places that they happen, and don't try to tease them apart. Keep looking for associations. Fold one thing in with the other and hold it like that, seeing them as interrelated. This is in order to hold things close, to care for them, to continuously take account of the everything else. Including, of course, the more than human world. It's absolutely imperative that we find some sort of way to begin to engage with a much larger, less humanized community. Why? To protect us all. Human-centeredness is not in the interests of either humans or non-humans. So, can we adopt a practice of caring beyond the home group? Can we dress in ways that enhance our ecological identities? Can we design in ways that enhance our understanding of human embeddedness in nature? Can we design in ways that prioritize relationships, that bring forward alternative models of caring? Can we design while acknowledging uncertainty and the limits of human knowledge? perhaps what we've got to do is to find a route to better understanding of human embeddedness in nature, which shows humans not as some sort of outside of nature, nor above the ecological fate that has overtaken other species. And yet, of course, escaping the dominant paradigm is proving to be extraordinarily difficult. It undermines our ability to address the needs of the planet that we're living on. More progressive attempts to engage with ecological flows and to integrate with living processes are continuously undermined by the pervasive rationalism, the reductionism, and the human-centeredness of the systems that we're working in. But perhaps by acting together, we can push for simultaneous generation of knowledge, action, empowerment, and change. And as Matilda mentioned, just about 50 paces away from here, the seed of the idea was born for the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion. In just over a year, we have all of these members subscribed, but on the back of writing a really radical manifesto that called out growth as the fundamental limiting factor that's stopping important change happening. And over this past year, there's been loads and loads of different activity. We've worked with funding organisations to try to support a greater variety of projects. We've written questions to conferences. We've written addendums to reports. We have lots of local assemblies all around the world, and then people draft a communique and send that back to everybody else. So Matilda also mentioned this. This is a very recent piece of work. So how can we find a way to change what we think? As we said, maybe we can work together like with the union. Maybe we can work by changing a paradigm. The work of Earth Logic that Matilda and I produced last year starts from a very simple beginning. It says that what if you put Earth first, before profit, before business, before everything? If you do that, it's extraordinarily simple, but it changes everything. We see Earth Logic as replacing growth logic. It offers a new beginning point, a new place to start and to move forward, a new action plan for fashion. Perhaps another way that we can change what we think is by telling new stories. Barry Lopez, the esteemed writer, in his book Crow and Weasel, said, I would like to ask you to remember only this one thing, said Badger, one of the characters. The stories people tell have a way of taking care of them. If stories come to you, care for them and learn to give them away where they are needed. Sometimes a person needs a story more than they need food to stay alive. That is why we put these stories in each other's memory. This is how people care for themselves. And over more than 5 years, I have been writing stories about a new relationship with nature that perhaps is gifted to us by a sensibility around clothing. And I'm going to read you part of one of those stories now. So this is called The Wind. Today, I wanted to go to the Goit Valley, but I was late leaving and missed the best of the bright skies. Up there, It was cool and wind screamed from the west. The cloud base, total grey, flattened the landscape, and as I walked, the clouds lowered still more and it began to rain. The unceasing fine rain of an autumn low-pressure system. I climbed through the trees to the high ridge edging a wall and onto the open moorland. The wind, howling across the dark peak, was now at my back. I scuttled along in the cloud mist, my feet doing tiny racing steps, tottering, jerky, not my own. It was then that I felt it, the wind. It was holding me. There is no better way to describe it. The wind came careening up and over the moor, leaning into me, pressing into me, and it lodged itself there. The touch of the wind that day is best explained not by measures of force or speed, but by its quality. It was steady. It was a constant pressure, like a solid, like a person when it touches you. There was no raggedy unevenness of blustery gusts. The air was dependable under my limbs. It had an edge, a form. I could feel it. It was like the urge of an arm, a body close at my back. The wind filled the underside of my mittens and it pulled at the back of my coat, under my hood, the legs of my trousers ballooning forward like sails. Together, the wind and I stumbled the ridge. Each step I took, the holding reorganized itself around my body. It was spooning me. It knew who I was. For how else to explain that as I moved, it was already there, filling in the space where I wasn't. It was a remarkable, anticipatory, physical presence. 3 weeks later, I go back to the same area with my oldest boy. We walk together, sometimes side by side, but mostly I'm behind, because he was of an age where he ran everywhere. He now sleeps everywhere, but not run. On the far hills, the rough land of the moor is purple. The bare stems of heather in winter, and it's also blue, the underside of pine needles. The cloud is still low, it really hasn't lifted for weeks, but in the wind, everything pulses. As we skirt another high ridge, the wind blows across and through us, piling in just behind the left shoulder seam and forcing its way out at the collarbone, centre right. As we reach the highest part of the ridge, exposed fully, we scudder along, our bodies moving compulsorily in the charge of air. Out of control legs, we laugh and stumble. My coat sleeves bow in the gusts, making the bones in my arms into shapes never seen before in a limb. I look at them, these crazy alien distortions. I like the new me. We throw ourselves down onto the bilberry shrub floor, flattening ourselves into the ground, laughing. We lift our heads, our arms. My mittens fill with air. The wind is holding my hand. My coat's wide sleeves grip onto the lip of a gust. My trousers, wide-legged, act as a kite. These are the key pieces of the season. And if you have a top layer that opens up the front, so much the better. To hold and be held, undo the fastening, grasp the bottom corners, one in each hand, and then gripping your coat tight, raise your arms high above your head. So, the stories of our lives, if only our own stories, wouldn't be worth telling. But these stories become an ethos for our times. because they show interconnectedness, they show compassion, and they show generosity. Perhaps what they do is they show us how we can live and what is important.